Okay, this is part 2 of the Wicked Camper update.
News, actually, on our Network News in the evening. And I actually had to pause the My Sky and rewind it and look at these vans, a number of them, a sample of them. And I was honestly incredulous. I sat there with my wife. I'm a dad, a young dad. Well, I shouldn't say young dad, a youngish dad of 4 girls.
Yeah, four
And I'm
girls.
like,
Wow.
yeah, 4 girls, yeah. And they range in age from 22 to 15. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm not a Puritan. We do a network radio show in New Zealand, and our whole brief and shtick is fun and entertainment. These things, under the guise of fun and entertainment, have completely overstepped the mark. I listened to a little bit of your chat with your senator there, and you talked about freedom of speech. And I think that's fair, freedom of speech, but to a point. I don't want to be offensive on your program, but sometimes I've seen comments like, "Oh, you guys need to lighten up. It's just a little bit of fun." Listen, there's one at the moment. I'm glad they've got these big corporates on board. It uses the Pepsi slogan. So it's got a picture that's the very, very recognizable, iconic Pepsi logo. But instead of Pepsi, they've got pussy, as in, female genitalia slang term. Pussy, taste the difference. That's their van. They've got one saying it's better to be black than gay because you don't have to tell your parents. There's one about, using a picture of a rooster, and it uses the COCK word, having sex with a donkey. And it's like, these aren't funny. These are cheap, nasty. They are offensive on every single level. And I do think somebody I heard you comment on said, you can turn away, but hey, you can turn off a movie, you can turn off a radio station, you can turn off your TV, but when you pull up on a street and you see that van next to you, you have to do some explaining. When you're at a camping ground and you're sitting next to a wicked camper van, that is offensive. And I just think there's somewhere along the line, we actually have to have a thing called common sense, which the world seems to have lost. Common sense dictates this guy is a jerk that runs that outfit. He is arrogance personified, and he needs to be stopped. And the best way to stop idiots like that is to hit them in the pocket. So if campgrounds ban those vans, which is happening in New Zealand, and tourist operators say to potential clients, hey, look, if you rent a wicked van in New Zealand, you won't be able to go anywhere. They just won't rent them. Because at the moment, what's happening in New Zealand, I'm not sure if you're aware, but tourists who have no idea because they can't speak English, they can't read English, driving around with these vans, they go to a campground and they say, sorry, you can't stay here. You go, what? You can't. And so that's the way to stop this clown.
That is very effective. I was shocked by one of the images I saw of a van that was in New Zealand which had Snow White, Disney's Snow White, and the Wicked Witch. And the Wicked Witch was passing her methamphetamine pipe to smoke some ice.
Yes, I know.
There's no words in that, but it's just sort of mind-bogglingly revolting. And this is where the power of intellectual property comes in. Disney may or may not be aware of this beforehand, but I understand part of this campaign has been letting these companies know how their property is being used.
Exactly right, and that's the best way again, because these corporates, like if you even use anything remotely like a likeness to their product, they order a cease and desist from their lawyers, and it's sent forthwith. It's 24 hours and you're done. And if you use it again, you'll really come under some serious restrictions. So that's where these. But do you know the funny thing with this operator, who I hate to say this Australian, I love Australians, but this guy lets you down terribly. He will not respond to anybody. He has been asked for so many comments. He doesn't care. Such is his arrogance, he honestly believes and subscribes to the theory that all publicity is good publicity. He's loving this stuff. He just thinks this is brilliant for his product. Well, if people don't rent his vans, he won't think it's so funny then.
I should put it on the record that Life Letters did approach the company and John Webb with the only contacts we were provided by the call centre to do so, and we have not heard back from him. So he's welcome to come on any time and discuss this with us.
You never will. I mean, we've got anecdotal evidence too, I might say, where somebody rented a van, it was offensive. They said to the operator at the outlet, they said, oh, look, we can't drive this van. And the guy literally said to them, forgive my language, but it's important people understand this. He just said, look, I don't give a shit. And so that's what you're dealing with there. And
but you've really garnered a lot of public support. I think you were asking for 100,000 likes on your page about it. And how's that going?
Oh, look, it's brilliant. And we did that in 2 days. Again, the interest is enormous because now it has reached, we interview on our show the Prime Minister of New Zealand every week, John Key, And he's onto it. You know, he's got 3 government ministers now that have really got. They're going to impose bans on these guys and fines, and they're really ramping it up now because I think the interest is overwhelming, and people are saying, all right, we understand a joke, we accept that, but this is not a joke. This is not funny. It's xenophobic. It's homophobic. It's violent. Do you know? Look, stop me if I'm boring you. I'll just tell you this last story. There was an Australian reporter in Byron Bay who wrote a critical story on wicked campers.
Yes,
Do you remember this?
yes, we were just talking about her earlier with Lewis, and they responded with a personal message for her, which
I know.
CEO John Webb said he was unaware of. Simon, we will watch your campaign with great interest from across here and see what People Power can do. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Look, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you for having me on. I just finished by saying common sense has got to prevail, and common sense is forget freedom of speech. These are offensive. So thanks so much.
Well, good luck with it. Yeah, that's brilliant.
Thank you.
Well, there we go. There's the view from Simon Barnett, who's one half of Cy and Gary on More FM radio in New Zealand. Also joining us is Sophie Reed. She's a clinical psychologist who thinks a lot about the impacts of, I guess, pornography and other imagery on children. Welcome, Sophie.
Thank you.
Now, tell us, maybe some people think we're overreacting, but what happens to a child when these images are presented to them?
Sure. So when a child is exposed to what I would call a traumatic image, so it's something that makes them feel yucky, horrible, they don't know where to put that. They don't have the cognitive development to understand what to do with that sort of image. What we know about traumatic images is they get stuck in the short-term memory loop and they don't get processed into the long-term memory. So these images cycle around and around and around in their awareness. We know that in terms of extreme cases of trauma as well, when you have intrusive images or flashbacks. And so for young people or for children, they don't know where to put these images within their self, and so they clunk around not really knowing what to do, and they come up and cause a lot of distress. There is a sense that young children know that these images aren't right. That's the first impulse, is they don't know that they're right. But for them, they're really not sure how to process it or kind of move it from this continual invasive kind of image. And in the research I've done around children's exposure to online images, traumatic images, that one of the kids in that research program said, what has been seen cannot be unseen. So images actually have a very different kind of impact on children compared to, say, words, for example.
So what kind of age groups are we talking about?
Yeah, sure. So, the research I've done is on children from the age of 8, so year 3, year 4, up to year 12. And what you find is it's different levels of images are sort of differently exposed. So the children who are in that sort of primary school age, it's really exposure to news images. Often one of the things that stands out for me around Hurricane Katrina was, lots of images online of dead bodies floating in the water at 7 o'clock prime time. I actually think that freedom of speech doesn't supersede caring for our children. I think we actually have to care for our children first as a community.
Well, this raises a point. This stuff is everywhere. Billboards, games, books, online, everywhere. Is it possible to control these, or are you just in a position where you have to give a child a coping mechanism?
Yeah, sure. Look, I think the most important thing for parents is to talk about this, and to talk about this in a way that doesn't shame your children. Shame sends things underground for children. So to actually say to your kids, there's nothing that you could tell me that would make me love you any less. We can talk about anything. And for parents to take a deep breath about talking about difficult things like online pornography, exposure to things, exposure to horrible images. We actually do have a censorship kind of process in Australia already, because we do actually acknowledge that some things are not appropriate for different ages. So I think, these wicked camper kind of slogans and images wouldn't have been acceptable 30 years ago. I think we have become desensitised to objectification of women, violence against women. And I think the elephant in the room is that it's really around our desensitisation to online pornography. By the age of 11, 50% of children have been exposed to online porn. We know that online porn, 95% of online porn tends to be violent, sexually, emotionally or physically towards women. So we know that we're becoming really desensitised to this, and that's why it's so hard to kind of pull people like Wicked Camper into line.
It does just feel like an immense volume. I think I've read that in the past people would come across a sort of a damp magazine in a park, and that would be their only exposure to pornography, and now it's hard not to find. All right, well,
and that pornography wasn't violent.
Right.
that wasn't
That's the
violent
news.
towards women. So what's happening is because it's so, like wicked camper, you have to go to the extreme to catch the interest of people because our brains seek novelty. So once everybody's seen everything online, the pornography companies actually have to make things more violent to get the attention, to get the next kind of, corner of the market.
Right, and then there's a whole conversation about whether we are just normalising it by talking to our children about it in ways like that. Thank you so much for being part of this conversation. That's Dr. Sophie Reed. She's a clinical psychologist and director of the Birch Tree Centre of Excellence in Trauma, Addiction and Eating Disorders. Obviously, we're keen to hear what your thoughts are. So go to either our homepage or follow.
Yeah, okay. Obviously, the wicked camper that I saw in the main street of Glen Innes a week ago was decorated with some of the more mild slogans of the breed. From memory, there was one from Henry Rollins that had a cartoon caricature of him, and what it said is, half of life is fucking up, the other half is dealing with it. Now, there was absolutely no misogynistic overtones. There was no violence. There was a very humorous observation on the nature of the human condition and existence, and there was the use of the word fuck, which I was taught at the Catholic boarding school was an acronym of a British legal charge for forced unlawful carnal knowledge. So I suppose if you're really into your semantics and linguistic history, yeah, okay, forced unlawful carnal knowledge is a violent sexual act. So by putting the word fuck on the side of your car, therefore you're traumatising all the people who've been forcefully, unlawfully made knowledgeable about carnal issues. But, there is the dichotomy that the same word means copulate. It doesn't always mean utterly destroy. But yeah, okay, half of life is fucking up, the other half is dealing with it. It's not in the same class as the sort of stuff that they were talking about. Inside every little princess, there's a dirty slut who just wants to try it once. Yeah, I wouldn't like to try and explain that one to a 4 or 5 year old kid in a national park or a caravan park or anything like that. Speaking of which, they mentioned that they didn't think there were any government-owned caravan parks. There's not government-owned caravan parks, but the New South Wales Roads and Maritime Services requires local councils to maintain free access camping grounds. There's one at Yarraford, just 5 miles from where I'm standing at the moment. I think they're every 100 kilometres up the road, or there is a set of standards for government-owned camping grounds. They're owned by the local councils and they're mandated by the people who run the highways. So yeah, you could lock wicked campers out of them. I didn't actually see the white writing on the rear window of the wicked camper. I was just walking down the main street and here's this car with a picture of a bloke I've never heard of and a pretty funny slogan on the driver's door. I go around the other side and it's got a picture of John Wayne, and John Wayne's quote was, "Life is hard, it's harder if you're stupid." Well, that doesn't discriminate against women and it's not violent at all and it's got no sexual connotations. But it did make me interested enough in the car to then notice it had wicked written on the bonnet and then, go and pull a friend out of his shop and say, come and have a look at this. And we both had a look at it. Neither one of us noticed the sign writing on the back window. And for those people who are worried about being stuck in traffic behind them, on the back window, all it said is, rent this car, and Wicked Camper's YouTube, internet address and phone number. So maybe I saw the mildest Wicked Camper that's free and roaming on the roads, or maybe Wicked Campers have pulled their head in a bit. It's a very effective advertising method because it certainly makes you look at their cars, and once you look at their cars, eventually you figure out that, oh, this is an attention grabber, so you'll look at where to rent the thing. Very interesting. I don't know where it's going to end. But there you go. 2-part update on the wicked camper mystery. Warbles on a lot to YouTube. Ciao.